It's Tuesday, July 23rd, and it's a pretty gray morning, but the grays in the sky have caught my attention lately. The way they change from warm grays to cool grays, or cool grays to warm grays. And I think that my working with the dyes, pigments, dyeing fabrics, and the very subtle changes, because I use mostly foraged plants, sometimes the dyeing process, which is a pretty long process, but I find it relaxing, like making bread. The colors are very bright when they're wet, and then as they dry, sometimes they almost vanish. But because I've seen them wet, and I've seen the whole transition of the beautiful liquid onto the fabric, and the excitement of seeing those changes, I see a lot more in those dried, very subtle colors that almost don't exist. And because of that, the skies have become more intriguing to me, the gray skies. And so let's see if I can do this. A lot of wires in the way there. Well, it doesn't look like the camera is capturing the colors. The real colors that I'm looking at are somewhere between slate and graphite. They're very warm. They don't, as I'm looking at the little screen here on my camera, the sky that I'm showing you is looking very purplish. And it's not that. So here's the stand of trees again. I'm peering between the fence posts, the farm across the street. And I'm thinking that maybe I'll come out with my body easel and do some sketching. Oops, it's focusing on that. Wait, there we go. And do some sketching of this grouping of trees. Because we talked in Art Book Club yesterday, we talked about, or I presented Kurt Jackson's sketchbooks. And he had an area on trees that I'm going to go back and talk more about next week. So this might be a good time to do this stand of trees. But I'm really noticing the ferns. It appears to me that the telephone poles are far more bent than they used to be. I don't know. I tried to get a good angle on that telephone pole to show you what I mean. I've been looking at these telephone poles for 29 years. And a lot of them are still straight, but a number of them have appeared to bend far more in the past year. Since we've had so much rain, my theory, which could be completely wrong and just invented in my own head, is that, like the trees, the poles are absorbing a lot of moisture and are weakening. So with the storms that we get, the weakened parts start to rot. And then with the big winds, they just blow over. Now, in spite of the fact that this having a wire, I don't know if you can see it, that supports it, there's a lot of weight on one side that pulls it toward the road, okay, connecting all these wires. And what I've noticed is that in the storms, we're getting a lot more telephone poles down, which means we lose power and we lose all kinds of things for a while. And the telephone poles snap. Now, sometimes they're down completely. Not all of the poles have the wires that support them in the opposite direction. But the ones that do seem to kind of buckle at the bottom and then pivot on the buckle rotted part. So they're kind of held back by the guy wire, but whatever that wire is called, the supporting wire. But the pole is still down. Now, I can't help but think that that's another aspect of one of the effects of the clearly illustrated in so many ways climate change. This is one way that the bottom part that seems to rot the fastest is supported. And this one has actually two supporting wires. Cables, one, and one is right there, back there in the woods, a little diagonal. Maybe because it has a transformer on it. Every time I pass this tree, there's vine hanging down, I find myself smiling. And then I think, every time I see vines that have the potential of hanging down like that, I find myself smiling. And the reason for that is that as a child, I grew up in a community that had woods behind it. Vast areas of woods, owned, I believe, by the water company. That when it was the woods that we would walk down to and down into the path by the stream, take off our boots, change into our ice skates, skate down the stream between the trees. It was beautiful. Down to the reservoir every day. It was cold enough that we could start skating in November, and we would skate every day for a good month and a half before the big snows came and ruined the ice. Well, those woods were fabulous. They were my playground. And another activity during the nicer weather, or the warmer weather, was to go down to the woods, find vines, test them out for strength. We'd let the older kids test out the strength. And then we would swing on them. And there were two that I remember distinctly that were really, really fun. One was in a dry part of the woods on a hill, so that you would run off, you grab the vine, because it was hanging down in a place where you could reach up and grab it, and then you pull it back a little bit, run down a bit of that hill, and then the hill dropped, so you would swing out over this lower part. So it felt like you were swinging a lot higher than you were because the ground dropped out from under you. And then, of course, when the vines started slowing down, you had to make sure to jump off at the right place where the ground was high, or you had a pretty long fall. So that was one of them. The other vine was a vine that that went over a stream. Okay, so that one was much harder to get to, and I believe that somebody, maybe Joel Baskin or someone, tied kind of a rope or a loop to it so that you could get to it and then pull it back to the bank. Now, the stream wasn't very wide, but in my mind, it seemed a lot wider and deeper than it probably was. But you would swing over it and see how many times you could go back and forth before you had to hop off. And on numerous occasions, we wanted to go for the record or to, beat our own record of how many times we could swing back and forth, which depended on the gusto with which we took off. You'd end up slowing down and be over the middle of the stream. So you'd hang on for a while, or you'd just drop off, but eventually you'd end up in the water. So those are really, really great memories. And I believe that that's why I find myself smiling every time I see a vine that is worthy of swinging on. Now, since then, I've learned that a lot of the vines, at least around here, are poison ivy. Now, when I was a kid, I never, ever got poison ivy. In spite of my sisters sometimes, and maybe I made this up, I'm not sure, but my memory is that they made me lie down in a whole lot of poison ivy and weren't very happy when I didn't get a rash. I could have made that up. So if my sisters are listening to this, maybe, I'm not going to say that was a true story. But somehow I found out that I really don't get poison ivy until now. And that may be because I did have COVID about a year and a half ago, and my immune system seems to be quite different now. And when weeding out the hedgerow between my property and the neighbor's property, there was a lot of poison ivy, and I didn't worry about it at all. So I didn't wear a long sleeve shirt, and now I'm really regretting it. So things change over time. I wonder if she's making a comment about me filming her. Seems to be like an excessive amount of labeling that goes on to the telephone poles. A little gem of color that pops out in all this greenery. Wild sweet peas. Once again, the mathematics displayed by plant growth delight me. Mathematical growth patterns everywhere. The forest is absolutely filled with them. Attention is drawn to patterns and the mathematics in nature. You see it absolutely everywhere. The world is waking up. Just maybe not soon enough. Many, many years ago, when the aerobics book first came out and my dad bought it, he and I started running together every morning before I went to school and he went to work. And as we rounded the last corner toward our home, one of us, or both of us, would always say, "Home stretch." Then we would run down the last bit of road and cook up a great breakfast to sit down and have together. So I've just turned the last corner before I end my morning walk. And for me, in my head, and this morning out loud, I always say, "Home stretch."